let's go back to this one slide that probably interested a lot of people. It's already quite cool that a lot of you who may not have known that the cortex had these different parts. It's already quite interesting to be able to map things out. So I want to help you understand how simple the mapping actually is. Even me, it took me a long time to understand, but I think it's actually explainable in a matter of minutes. I want to test you. What does the frontal lobe do? Motor. Planning, thinking, executive decisions. Okay. What does the parietal do? What does the somato? Huh? Movement was here in the frontal. What is the? Yes, it's somatosensory, tactile, touch, pain, temperature, and then the back, the occipital. Vision. And then the temporal lobe underneath. Okay, it's hearing, it's smelling. Emotions is partly here, but it's more in the insula or the insular cortex. So that's the map. Let's. It's good to go into repetition, and it's good to just open these things up anyhow. All right, so Broca's area. Remember, when people go into light language, that's responsible for speech production, and that's in the left. Again, when the eyes start moving, who here has been having the eye movements? That's the frontal eyelids, eye fields. It's more the anterior part of the frontal lobe. But basically, what you're initially looking at would be the primary motor cortex. The primary motor cortex would be near the middle. So let's look at the brain once more. Okay, so here's the brain. I guess now you can tell which is the front part and which is the back part. And this is kind of useful. At least you can check in, okay, what part of the forehead or the ear is that in? So a sulcus is more or less the division. It's the space in between. So let's look at the divisions. The central sulcus would be the division between the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. I don't know why it's not showing up, but let's look at the other one. Let's take out the pins. So this is the right brain. It would be right here. This is a sulcus. When you hear the word sulcus, it's the split. So the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe is divided by that sulcus. Just like here, the parieto-occipital sulcus. Now let's look at the Sylvian fissure. Like here, you would see a division right here. So there's an actual separation between the temporal lobe, like this one. The lateral sulcus is called Sylvian fissure. So there's an actual separation between this and this. And here as well. You can see the division right here. And you can see them a lot more clearly here. They're actual spaces here. So central sulcus, the parieto-occipital sulcus is at the back here, the kind of violet. And then here you can see the Sylvian fissure, the lateral sulcus, is actually quite deep. So when you spread out the cortex, it's actually quite huge. What humans did was we needed so much brain, so we needed to keep folding it. That's why it looks like a raisin, because it just wouldn't fit. You wanted a big brain, and because the cortex maps things out, if you spread it out, it would be like super huge. But for efficiency, you had to keep scrunching it together. And now you have the folds, which you call the sulcus or the sulci in plural. And then when you talk about the gyrus would be the mountains or the ridges, the ones that are protruding or bulging.
All these folds, they also protect the glands, right?
Yes. Well, they cover, yeah.
Yeah, so they are like the cushions.
In a way, yeah. The glands are all underneath. Mm. So like these protruding things over here, these are the gyrus. So when you start to study the brain, that's actually all it is. So this is a sulcus, that's a sulcus, and then when you want to look for let's say the Broca's area where language is happening, that's inside the gyrus. It's right here, the inferior frontal gyrus. One of the main things we're going to be talking about today would be the STG, or the superior temporal gyrus, is where the auditory cortex is located. That's where Wernicke's area is located. That's where we understand language and speech and so on and so forth. So just a little bit of brain science, because we will be looking at some of these things today. So let's go back to the presentation. So I want to share a basic concept with you, that every time you have a sensory modality, like right now we're looking at the frontal lobe, which is responsible for motor functions. Every single major sense has a map, and the map's actually quite sophisticated and beautiful. You're always mapping things out. As soon as you walk into a room, you're hearing things, you're touching things, you're moving the body, and then there's a whole map. So starting with the frontal lobe, the motor cortex has quite a funny looking map. I don't know if you know the homunculus. It's called the little man. And this is the homunculus. So this is the primary motor cortex, and when you move your body, you will activate a certain part of the cortex that's connected to a certain body part. So it's neatly mapped out in the homunculus. And you will see this kind of mapping like in the other parts of the cortexes as well. So the primary cortex is usually the one to absorb the energy. Like, it's not so clear here in the frontal lobe. I would go maybe as an example of this. Let's look at something a little bit more visual or more graphic or more storytelling. The ear, through the cochlea and the auditory cortex, has a map. And for musicians, this is called a tonotopic map. So there's a part of the brain that's wired like a keyboard. And then there's a part of the ear, the inner ear, that's wired like a keyboard. And that's called the organ of Corti. Let's open what that map looks like. It looks different from the homunculus. It's this one right here. I have a really interesting program on my phone. I think it just helps when we learn to visualize what it actually looks like. So in this particular app, you see this sound thing right here. You can press a sound, and then you can trace what happens to the sound as it enters the ear. So the shell-looking thing right here is the organ of Corti. And then, oh, sorry. Let's go back. Sorry about that. I think I lost my connection. Oh, it's because I lost my internet. Okay. Let's reestablish the link. Okay, so let's make this smaller again. So the sound enters the ear, passes through the eardrum, and then goes into the inner ear. The sound gets translated into an electrical impulse, and then it travels through the cochlear nerve and enters the auditory cortex. And then that is mapped out in the brain. Again, let's watch it. So the snail-looking thing is where the sound is mapped out. As it passes through there, it's going to read the frequency of the sound. And then it gets translated into an electrical impulse. And then it's sent into the auditory cortex, where it is further mapped out based on the frequency and the intensity of the sound. I can get rid of that now. This one, the mechanism of the ear.
Oh, it's only for the ear.
It's just for the ear, yeah.
The app.
Yeah. I don't know what happened, but you can actually press to magnify the organ of Corti so you could see the whole spiral. But I guess we get the point across. This is the organ of Corti. At least you saw what it looked like. And the map is here. The lower frequencies are here. And then the outer layers all the way to the tail of the organ of Corti, that would be where the higher frequencies are felt. They're actually just being sensed by hair cells. It's mechanical in the beginning. Before it's translated like a synthesizer, it's analog. Before it becomes digital, the hair. So when you damage that, that's really when you don't have tonotopy. So then when it reaches the auditory cortex, the whole thing is mapped out across the temporal lobe. And then that's where you become aware of a sound, right? So the human ear normally can only recognize at the lowest maybe 20 hertz, and the highest would be 20,000 hertz. Certain animals can hear as much as 200. No, I mean 80,000 to 2,000 hertz. Like bats, dogs, their range is just so much higher than the human ear. So we have a specific spectrum that we work with. So most spectral analyzers, they begin only in 20 hertz and then they would end at 20,000 hertz.
Most of us can't even hear all the way to 20.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think by the time you're
Yeah.
like 16, you can only hear up to like 18 to 16, if I remember.
Yeah. So that's like severely like the most extreme.
If you're the greatest hearer in the world.
So my point is really simple. I want to just show you that every single major lobe, there's a primary cortex and then there's an association cortex. What do we mean by that? So let's say your primary auditory cortex would receive the sound or would read the movements, like through the primary motor cortex. It's not just about hearing or absorbing the sound. You need to be able to make meaning out of that. So then all of these have what's called association cortexes. So the primary cortex would have a motor association cortex. Just as the auditory cortex, the primary would also have an association cortex. Just as the parietal cortex also has an association cortex. This is the little man for the sensory cortex. It also has a homunculus. So let's look at the brain and find out where that is. This is the central sulcus. Yeah? And remember, this is the primary, no, this is the central sulcus. This is the primary cortex, and this is the homunculus, or the little man, where we sense motor functions. Remember, the frontal lobe is where motor is happening. Somatosensory is where touch, feeling pain is happening. So the homunculus, or the little man, parietal lobe is here. And then the association cortex would now be spread across here and spread across here. So an association cortex is where you make meaning of what you touch. It's not enough to pretty much, okay, I can feel that. But then what does it mean? It needs to associate, right? It's something that we had to devise to make things meaningful. Same with the temporal lobe. We already looked at this, yeah. There's an auditory association cortex, and it's usually next door to the primary cortex. It's just important right now to understand that all the primaries have association cortex, like this one. Like vision also has a map, and that's not called tonotopy, it's called retinotopy. So this is amazing. The map isn't in the inner eye, it's actually in your retina. You have a color wheel in your retina, and that has to reflect in the occipital lobe. It's kind of like what the ear does. The organ and the cortex needs to map things out, and it looks like this one. So there's a rainbow both here and here. Color doesn't exist. They're just frequencies. Your brain's making up the color because of the range that you're able to absorb that's in between the infrared and the ultraviolet. But there are people in the journeys who are saying, I am now seeing colors I've never seen before. So most people are called trichomats. You have the 3 color cones. Some people now have 4. And that's called tetrachromacy. They're weird people. They actually can see more. But, as well, women have more color cones than men. You have almost double. Women are super sensitive because they're absorbing more light. Color cones are responsible for interpreting color. Color rods are more for when it's kind of dim or dark. So women's eyes aren't actually shaped the same as men's.
You see more colors.
You do. Or more blind.
That's why we're more attractive. Because if you don't see as much colors than I do, and I wear a nice dress with many colors,
I just go,
different.
She keeps asking me, what do you think of Yeah, yeah, more color cones. But then we do have men in the workshops who are saying they can see more colors now. So it's vibratory. It's not the color. It's the frequency. It's the range.
More colors and then colors that don't kind of exist. Like the past 2 years, there were so many in the online journeys who journeyed alone at home or who were in the workshops that they were like it's hard to explain the color because it's a color that I don't know. It doesn't exist. Like, what's the color? Well, it's like this and that, but it's like blue but not, but green but not, but silver, and it's like, okay, cool.
Are they seeing it with our eyes open after the sessions or during the sessions with our eyes
During
closed?
the journeys.
In the journey.
Closed.
Yeah, closed eyes.
And after the journey, sometimes this eyesight changes. The sense of how things are appearing. And like my kids, sometimes they say that, what are all these little colors? You know, mommy, can you see this? Like, everything is just like pixels in little floating different forming.
The mind and the brain, our life would change if we could see things differently, and actually has super literal meanings now. The eye is transforming because it's evolutionary. When you think of a dog, dogs don't really see color. They can see a little bit of red, but basically the world is black and white. You could be wearing the loudest color clothes, they wouldn't recognize it. So somehow we evolved in this way where we have more systems of interpretation. That's one of the things that seem to be changing now.
I think it was at least for myself, I thought like I see
Mm.
just two of them, and Anda was, her mother was the one who had the brain cancer also, where she worked with the playlist, and she's the eye doctor, and then she was explaining how the thing works, and she's like, your eyes don't see, it's your brain, and how you interpret, so as a doctor, she's not treating the eyes, she's treating the brain, and I was like, huh? My eyes are the ones that, so you're teach at school that eyes are the ones that see, not that it's actually there's a root cause somewhere in the brain why something is happening with the eyes. So that it's just like for me mind blowing. Maybe other people know it, but I think our conception is like ears hear, like fingers are the ones that touch that feel, and senses are like this, and then we're not even looking at where it's coming from.
Yeah. The chakra system is all actually systems of interpretation mostly.
There was a video on the internet circling about a man whose both hands were on the table, but this was a rubber hand. They put the blanket over his hand, and he couldn't see the hand. But when people go with pencil over the rubber hand, they were also going over his own hand. And actually, at the end, it felt like his hand.
Yeah. That's called the phantom limb.
What to flash it, and he was really screaming.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
the brain.
It becomes real in the brain.
Yeah.
What about the kids who can read
Yeah.
with their hands?
Yeah. This is where we would go into a concept which we're near. It's called synesthesia.
I was just kind of just bringing in.
Go.
I knew we were going to go there, but just like everyone knows how it is, but like when you see a color or you see something, some image or someone or something, it brings up a smell or a taste or something. And I like to refer to the kids because they are so wise. Like I was showing shorts to my daughter, like pink and yellow, and then she was like, oh, I don't like egg yolk at all. Like that tastes so bad. Those pants taste so bad. So I take the pink ones.
That's totally it. There are certain human beings whose wires get crossed, and so they can hear the color. Like Nabokov, there are famous artists who have their wires crossed. That a word has a smell, a word has a color, a sound has an emotion. That's what it means for the association areas of every single sense to start to associate on another dimensional plane altogether. And a lot of people actually call that emotion. Emotion, in many ways, is in fact just an ability to associate external stimuli that you're able to integrate. A lot of them, that's translation from beyond just the words. It's taking in mechanical impulses and you're translating that into electricity, integrating that in the brain.
So I don't know if it's red or not.
Yes.
When I read things, I don't see letters. I see vision. I like pollen.
Yeah, totally it. That's it. That's synesthesia. It has many names: multisensory integration, association capacities. It's it. It's what we're doing. We're increasing the sensitivity, and we're also helping the ability to bring all that together. But a lot of people are being judged. Synesthesia used to be thought about as a problem, but now they are also associating that with genius. But for a long time, you're weird. You need to go somewhere and get some help.
Ever since I was a little girl, like I have to be really careful about what I hear, and I couldn't listen to music for about 20 years because I can feel the emotion.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can even taste emotion in food.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just thought it was my trauma. I just can't listen to music.
The insula is very much that. if you are sensitive, your amygdala, your limbic system, and your insula is very easily triggered. And I'm sure you know a lot of people who are pretty much like boink, and they tend to be introverted, super shy people. Yeah, highly. It's called HSP, highly sensitive person. It's an actual category in psychology now. There are certain cultures that's a lot more sensitive than others. They really take to heart everything you say. You need to be really careful around them. They absorb it. Like shame cultures as opposed to guilt cultures.
Imagine facilitating a group of Japanese or like many Asian bodies. It's like
Yeah.
it's really interesting.
It doesn't need a lot
Yeah,
to send it off. Okay, so it sounds simple what I'm sharing you, but suddenly you have a whole map of the brain. You now have a much better understanding of the cortex, because you realize, oh, okay, the cortex is just made of usually a primary and an association cortex, and then a few extra. That's it. Because now you know, okay, this has a motor function. Oh, it has a primary and a motor association cortex. This has a somatosensory little man homunculus. And then you need to interpret that, so it has a motor somatosensory association cortex. This has a primary visual cortex, but you need to interpret the colors. So now you have visual association cortex. And then you have a primary auditory cortex just to absorb the sound, just to be aware that the sound is there, and then to map it out based on frequency. But to make meaning out of that, that's where you would need the association auditory cortex, right? Got it? And then you still have the olfactory cortex, sense of smell, and then the association cortex for the olfactory sense. And then the gustatory or gustation, it's in the insula. Taste is here, it's in the insula. And then that still needs an association cortex.
Can I ask for the colors? Because there is this our school teacher where he did this, like when you have a really strong paper like the color, but it's stronger than normal colors, then it's like color therapy. So he said when he shows like big red paper with the color, then fever comes up, or like people react. So what happens in the, when you see a color and it actually creates a body reaction?
Because colors are frequencies. They're part of the, it's a lot more micro, the spectrum of light, but because it's still being interpreted by the visual and retinotopic map in the retina, they still hold frequencies, and therefore they need to bear representations in us. So red, but it's very personal and cultural, because red in China wouldn't mean red in the West. It's the same. Red is super positive. They actually got confused when they were transporting the stoplight to China, because in China red means go. Green is kind of a negative in China.
So when the impulse of the color goes, and then it
Yeah.
tells you what this is associated, and
Yeah.
the reaction comes from. Like,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we don't know why in some cultures that actually. So chakra systems and all that, it's not actually by any means universal. It was a Westerner who took an Eastern concept and says there's only 7. Initially with the Buddhists, the Hindus, the Nepali, there were 21 chakras, there were 5, there were 9, there were 10. It was a small bunch of authors from the Theosophical Society and whatnot who said there's 7. But I'm not like judging that. I think it's actually the West and the East working together to achieve some kind of chaos and order, chaotic dance.
So if this is kind of cultural as well.
Mm.
The perception of the amount of chakras, for example. Then we can really again like support our intuition in a way, like
Yes.
in the work.
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you just forget about what you've learned and then go just searching, and you can actually work on different dimensions of cultural, you know, aspects of the body. You know, the chakras might not be here in the center, and so they can be.
It's like a control.
Yeah.
It's all systems of interpretation. Yeah, yeah.
There's a box.
There's some truth to it, but at the end of the day, it's actually all illusion as well.
It could be 7, why is the number 7 not
Yeah.
we have another number?
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
They
yeah.
agree with that.
What's the arbitrariness in it? Yet, what is the universality that we still landed there somehow? It's kind of empowering in a way that they're all interpretations.
Yeah.
So you could go into another dimension where no, there's actually more colors, or I could be a dog where there's only like red and orange.
That would be a box
It's up to you.
in the body itself is being boxed.
Mm.
The chakra is being boxed in the body.
Yeah,
instead
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah,
out there.
yeah,
So everything's being boxed.
yeah, yeah. It teaches us how to listen as well, because if you're going to facilitate a Chinese or a dog, what is the system here?
Two chakras with dogs.
Right. What's the playlist for them?
But then they have a smell, which is like
Yeah, yeah. And their hearing is like a lot more.
That's why when we yesterday were talking about the space holding, like to bear this in mind, like in saying that I don't know how to say the word
Interpretation.
whatever. And then so if someone sees a blue color and I analyze where I say, oh, it means this and that, or now in your this chakra means this. So to be really careful how much we put our own system into place when someone else is experiencing something, because then we start influencing how they might actually see things and not give them the possibility to find out themselves too. So all these belief systems and maps and stuff to really check in, like, okay, do I need to analyze or tell?
Okay. So now that we climbed up, we understand that there are the primary sensory areas, and then now we know there's the association areas. The question is, how do we translate? Where do we put it all together? We did think about the thalamus yesterday as a bus station, but there's something more. There are areas of the cortex that's called multimodal association areas. Now, there's a reason why I used the particular playlists this morning just to point this out to you. I wasn't just putting that out by random chance. I wanted to demonstrate to you how certain things come together. Now, what was prominent this morning was there were these movies. Some of you recognized the movie playing this morning. Not everyone, I see. A lot of you probably do know Morgan Freeman. Lucy. The thing with the brain. Lucy. Dolphin, 20% brain capacity, neuron. Morgan Freeman. The other movie was Prometheus. Most of you probably haven't watched it, but I don't remember the name of the actor, the guy from Memento. So you remember the part where he was talking about fire, the first technology, nuclear weapons. So I'm not talking about movies per se, I'm talking about words. Let's say there's touch, you're touched. Now, okay, that's somatosensory. I can hear the sound. That's the kind of obvious part. Proprioception, I'm not moving or in position in a certain way. What do words do in your brain? How are you processing words? Words actually are translation devices. Words aren't just words. They actually converge already so many meanings. So words hide sounds, images, and movements. A word is not just a word. Never underestimate the power of words the heritage of words, they are so much older than you are. Every time you speak a word,
Hide sensations as well.
The-
Words. Touch.
yeah, yeah,
Are you touching or you being touched?
yeah, yeah. It's tactile. It's not just sound. For me, words actually are ancient. We invented the spoken language about 10,000 years ago only. We've been here millions of years. So how I myself just remember it, we've been walking across the earth. After Africa, we diverged and we became cousins. And so much of the walkabout, that migration period, we started to make sounds. Some anthropologists say that language evolved with music. It's called musilanguage as a theory. How did that happen? Let's say we were in battle, or we were in the hunt, and then let's say we killed like a saber-toothed tiger or a mammoth. Obviously that would emote, that there would be emotion that, okay, we did it. So they started to make noises. It was only a matter of time before the noises started to harmonize. And that became a chant, that became a ritual. And then they kept moving their feet, and then suddenly they developed a rhythm. So now your language becomes prosodic, it starts to have the same elements music does. The sounds form and start to represent meanings. And then the brain adjusts and starts to bring more complexity to that. So words are historical in that way. How many cavemen had to throw the spear so that they could coordinate the nervous system? In the beginning, they were like throwing it like babies. They had to do it with such accuracy that would become Michael Jordan, who can get this, or Tiger Woods, who could get this. It's such a weird sport to begin with. Over there, they have this really small ball, and there's a tiny hole over there, and you're supposed to get the stick, and you're supposed to hit the ball in the fewest amount of tries to just make them connect somehow. You needed the brain to be so exact to invent the Tiger Woods and Peter Sampras. And I'm so old, I don't even quote the new super athletes, but to become a superhuman, which we are today, you had to make those connections between the eyes, the ears, motor functions. Language was the last to emerge, only about 10,000 years ago. So it's kind of weird, right? Like in a certain part of the world, we made an agreement that we would, through the phonetic system, we're going to use only 26 sounds. Out of the infinite amount of phonemes, okay, listen to a baby, they make these sounds, and they sound like they're stupid. Babies utter the 800 phonemes that make up every single human language. But somehow, in order to build New York City, Singapore, Dubai, we needed to agree on 26 letters, and that makes up the alphabet. How long did it take us to scatter across the world to agree that A means A, B means B, which is really just a sound? And then how do we combine that so that would become a word? That's insane. That we actually could negotiate and transact that when you say B-A-B-Y, that means that. And there are some words that are quite long. That's music becoming meaning. And there are certain parts of the brain that are responsible for that. And let's look at those parts of the brain. One of them is kind of obvious. It's actually the same place where the primary auditory cortex is located. It's called the superior temporal gyrus, and that's Wernicke's area. Wernicke, STG is one of the main multisensory places, but that's not what I want to look at. It's this one right here. This is called the posterior association area. I can't show it. Okay, I could make that disappear. It's right here. It's the floor of the brain. So this is key. I don't want to lose you here because this is where it comes together. The association cortex of visual, auditory, somatosensory, motor, olfactory all come together here.
Okay, wait.
All the association cortexes that we mentioned so far.
In all the lobes.
In all the lobes, they all meet there. That's the real airport.
They meet
It's the meeting point.
That's where the associations all associate there.
and then down into.
Yes.
What's the name again? Sorry.
The posterior association area. PAA.
Posterior association.
Posterior means at the back usually or at the bottom. Association area.
Let's meet in the posterior association area.
Where we can eat.
Yeah. The child waiting with the new mission.
That made language possible.
Is that like the basement of the brain?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
I love hanging out in the basement.
Yeah.
That's where it all comes together. That's where they have the party.
All the senses come. Okay.
That all the senses that now, for you to make meaning, they all need to meet there. They're associated in bits here, but they all need to integrate somewhere, and it's there. So I decided to give you a playlist today that had words in it. Because when you just hear sound for the sake of sound, you're actually just triggering mostly the auditory cortex. If you want the energy to go into the posterior association cortex, that's when you start bringing language, along with the touch, along with the sound, along with the visions that appear. You get it. You see what I'm getting at? To complete the brain so that, because when you're seeing something, it doesn't actually spread. When you're just hearing something, it's not spreading. But when it becomes meaningful, then that lights up. And then that further sends out to all the other parts. You're getting me now.
So what might that add to the experience?
Let's talk about it now. Was the morning different for you in some ways compared to the other inner dance sessions? Did it feel different? Yes. How so? There was a storyline.
There's a bit more thinking.
There was narrative. There was more thinking.
A little bit more thinking,
Mm.
but I was just
Mm.
still in a
Still there.
state.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say I personally felt more balanced in this session. Like, I think I'm sure the possibility of like a localized trigger still existed, but it seemed like more of a global experience, maybe because there's most of the senses happening.
Yeah. Let's hear from
I felt this morning.
Paul. You said you had something profound. You want to share your morning?
Yeah, normally I have a lot of visuals.
Mm.
But I think I was at the other side of the energy.
Mm.
Just a lot of things happening literally in my body.
Yeah.
Feeling things change.
Mm.
A lot of heat in my hands.
Mm.
And at the time it went quiet, and I received words,
Mm-hmm.
literally.
From inside, from you.
I don't know where
Yeah.
they came from, but they were so clear. You are here to heal. You are here.
Yeah. Amazing. Wow.
I woke up this morning and when Pi started saying it, those were the exact words I already had heard in the morning.
Mm.
Exact, like
Wow.
to the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking like, what the hell? So it's there.
It's there.
Yeah, it's there.
That was also you talking about
Mm.
being grateful or something.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was in
Already.
front of that feeling, and I was already
Yeah.
surrendering
Saying
to
thank you.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was cool.
And
So-
that made the difference.
Yeah. 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 I felt really clear when I woke up. It was asking for it. There are many sides to this. It doesn't always need will be profound because when you do use words, you might trigger the frontal cortex, which is a thinking brain. But where it's kind of going to go there or already there, it will have a certain energy that's because words are essentially there to limit what is too much. But at the same time, when a lot of the other systems are firing, then, anyone else wants to share about the morning?
Reflect because with Chungme, when we did the improvised session
Yeah.
about
Talk
sound,
about that.
it was interesting yesterday when we shared after, because when I felt that she's still kind of in the brain, and then I used words, so I talked to her as a third person, and she doesn't even remember that I actually talked to her. She remembers that the presence and the touch made her to go in it, to the line and the thing, but I actually used a lot of words, but she has no memory of it. We just lay down a few minutes, and I already started talking, and she doesn't have a memory of the words, because I felt the words. So there was something interesting with the mind and the words, but it wasn't even registered in a moment where she was in, but she wasn't yet like.
Language is more powerful sometimes than music as a way to bring the power of association. It has an ability to spread across the whole network. It's really not the words per se, because words don't exist without its own place in a whole ocean of meaning. Like, you don't understand light if you didn't understand dark. There has to be all these contrasts. You don't understand the word mother without all the connotations of mother, which has so many meanings. It could be like mother's milk, baby, womb, breasts, like woman. They're all networked with each other. So when you're able to speak or channel words in a way that the words just represent the whole network, you're not actually limiting anymore. You are holding memory. And then the meanings are being produced right then and there, even as they're being spoken. That was deep for you, that session.
Yeah, it was.
I think some people didn't know even what happened. How did it happen? Like, everyone is walking out.
Right. I had a question which was like, how do you do like inner dance without the music? Because Julie was saying, oh, you can do this without music. I was like, how this? Because we've been listening to music, and that's how it started. So I was like, okay, just come. Yeah. And then that's how it started. Yeah.
And then it just went off.
I think in the beginning I was still, as Julie was saying, in my head. And then people were leaving, so I think they were the sounds of people leaving. But then after a while it got really quiet. And then, how did it start? I think that we were talking about it yesterday. Like, it was about the touch that I felt first. That was very comforting, and then I felt safe. That was how it started. So the space started with the safety and comfort. And then you did something. You placed my hand, my right arm. We were talking about that. Right? The right arm activates the left.
Opens the left brain.
And what the left brain I thought was the more rational brain.
Yeah, but to extend it then opens that up, which is normally closed or linear.
So when the left brain opens, what happens?
From linearity, you become more nonlinear.
Okay.
Yeah.
What does it mean that it opens?
This is always sequencing, trying to predict in sequence, moment per moment. Like, that's how analysis happens, right? It's quite linear. So when you want to non-linearize that, this is an extension of the left brain. So
it disrupts the normal pattern of
sequentiality.
sequentiality.
So when you just open up this side, most of the limbs in this side, that already can expand.
Is that a change in the brainwaves? So like better.
Because proprioception and motor functions, this is where we're going, but this is a moot point. Motor functions and body position are also connected to somatosensory and auditory, and you're sending a signal to all the other senses that I'm going to open the registers. That's normally quite point per point. It's just a signal. A lot of people don't know this, and then they just start with the left, and that's a lot slower because this is the right brain is already open. you don't need to open it so much anymore. This is the mom. This is the dad. Open daddy. You create a signal just to get them into an even, equal space.
It's interesting because many people, when the movement starts, it's like my first inner dance was this or the right.
It's really there.
So something, it's like, it's really interesting that side. So when I go, like yesterday when I laid down, I'm like, okay, let's go. So I do it to myself. I already like, I trust I can surrender. I trust myself.
Okay, so this is amazing. We got somewhere. We actually got somewhere. It takes me usually a week to talk about the whole thing. It took maybe an hour. So let's move on. It's actually quite a huge deal. Now we take this even deeper. We're going to add layers that are hard to get to. This will answer certain questions. One of the most complex questions that people would rather just throw it away is, when people move their bodies, does it mean anything? When people are moving their bodies, does that mean anything? So we're going to honor that and not cancel it out. It actually means a lot. Okay? But first we have to address, where does the mind go when the inner dance or the journey or this thing happens? It's all about dimensions. So one way to look at that is the baby brain or the child brain. Some people may go here into the space in between this and this, or some people go here. They can become a baby or they become a toddler. Either you become 6 months old or you become 3 years old. So this thing in between, when people can't talk, they're talking to that. That's a space where children are only learning to discover words, especially the production of words. How old is your child?
14, 12, and 4.
Okay, so the 4 is near there. Language acquisition. They're making sounds and then they're connecting a vibration with meaning. In the beginning, it's not a word. It's just a sound. It's a vibration, and then they keep repeating it, and then. So many people, they go there. When they go into light language, it's more there. But when that starts to evolve, it starts to go here. So this is about to make sense to a lot of you. A baby doesn't think because there's no place-holding capacity to assign a meaning to a particular placeholder. They are thinking in a much different way, but what we call thought doesn't happen from an internal place. So every time they want to express something, it needs to be in public. It's not in secret, it's not inside, it's always outside. So when they move their body, they're thinking. When they're making a sound, they're thinking. So what we had to learn for a certain duration was how to think inside. So in the beginning, thought was not possible from an internal place. Those who spend time with small children, at the age of 3, starting with 2.5, 2, 3, 4, what you're watching is what's called egocentric stage. The egocentric stage is where the whole universe is about me. Okay? No one matters. They start talking to themselves as well. They're talking to the wall, they're talking to the toys. This is when the dream world is about to be internalized. And that's called the symbolic stage, where symbols start to appear and bear meaning. And then you become a secretive being. That's when you invented thought. You can now think inside. That happens at the age of 4, 5, or 6, where the things that you want to know, you don't have to keep expressing it outside. And language is so responsible for that. So there's a reason why humans are going back to public speech. And humans like that, when they go into that, like light language stages, inner dance, kundalini stages, they're not talking inside anymore. They're expressing with their bodies outside. That's what it means to become like a baby. They become kind of authentic. They don't have the filters. They don't say this is wrong or this is right. They just say what's coming through as truth. That's the baby brain. It's public speech. They're not, and in the whole room exploding like that, they're all talking to each other. That's what babies actually do. There's no separation between like this and that. That's crazy, but that's oneness from the baby's point of view. There's no filters. There's nothing. There's no morality. There's no up or down. There's no left and right. Everything just is.
They are also super sensitive to energy. Work with the baby.
Yeah, yeah.
The connection is there.
Yeah. Because there's a co-creation. It's like the baby is being affected by the room, and the room is going to affect the baby. And all babies who absorb too much and have to, that's trauma, like in many ways. So to bring about like massive change to become that baby stage means you're actually doing it so that you can make other meanings possible. People who are not happy with their meanings, they go there because if you want to change your life, you have to change the very understructure, which is where it all began. It had to begin where you were forming connections between the sound and the meaning. That's why people are stopping the talking process, ruining Broca's and Wernicke's area, so that they could reshape from the vibratory, the very sound, and what it means. So somewhere in between the egocentric speech stage, that's why spiritual ego does appear. Not in any negative sense, but it's actually part of the becoming baby, where no one else matters for now. It's like I'm the only universe that exists, which is how babies are. There's nothing outside. There's nothing. It's just me. I'm just the only one here. Ego in that sense is called solipsism. It's like invalidating everyone else. That's what happened to Descartes. Slowly to mature back into private thought, which is the imaginary realm, you also have to validate everyone else. That's when you're not a baby anymore. You're actually honoring others. That's the regrowth process. So that's you going back to the dimension, but retaining the dimension that was there. There are basically 3 dimensions just within this model. This model is by the developmental psychologists, the most important ones, Piaget and Vygotsky. And the real symbolic and imaginaries by the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, who took the notes from Freud and brought us structuralism. Our trauma with Freud is he brought us this. Sure, he wrote the interpretation of dreams. He was one of the first to look at dreams and said it was important. But we're traumatized by Freud because of the unconscious. He told us there's this thing. You remember the picture of the iceberg, and you can see the tip. And he said, okay, that's the conscious, the id, the ego, and then you are this thing that you can't see, and it's unknowable. Jacques Lacan, by giving us the symbolic and imaginary, he said, no, we can actually know this. Because if we understand language, structures the unconscious, then we become interested in the architecture. That's actually what language does. And then we understood the brain. And then we understood so many other things. So structure started to come when we realized that to understand the mind, you need to understand language. To understand language, you could also understand the brain. To understand the brain, you could also understand information is being processed. To understand all that, you can understand culture and spirituality. So more and more, they all had to lend to each other what in the past used to be, this is religious, this is chemistry. They were all separate. Structuralism was the coming together of all of it. I remember the last conversation I had with Ven and Wong. I remember it. I was sitting down with him. I said, structuralism, don't forget. He was just looking at me. It's like, okay. So there is something there about multi-sensory, multimodal ways of thinking that holds that systematicity that humans need. We need to take the notes from everywhere using the energy that is coming through now. A new structuralism is being formed.
So how did you relate this to movement? You said, let's not disqualify movement.
Exactly. Okay, here's where we're going. Remember in the first day we said that psychologists are realizing that our ability to conceptualize actually began with the dance. Your ability to move across the space allows you to think. So anyone who was told to stop moving and to behave, they have problems with thinking. And we're not talking about individuals, we're talking about whole cultures that are being introduced to language forms that are way too early, like mathematics, reading, writing, science, when the right brain has not formulated well enough because they lack multiple intelligences, which includes music, which includes kinesthesia. So now, this kind of makes sense. To bring people the movement back, you're actually going to help them to think again. We're giving people brilliance through body intelligence that's super duper missing. It substantiates what we do all of a sudden. This is what's needed. This is actually then the most important. So what we're going to do now, having looked at that, is to understand how can we bring the mind and the body back into marriage, because they became split. There is a whole argumentation in the science. Is it the mind or is it the body? What's the chicken and what is the egg? What came first? There's a split. There's this huge split. But now in structuralism, it's actually starting to come together. So literal meaning, for me, is judgment in many ways. Inner dances, the consciousness goes a lot deeper, so that you know what literal means. It's like, no, that's what you are. You're small. You should be ashamed of yourself, and the moment you hear that, you become literal. But no, I'm metaphorical. I'm much deeper. I'm actually very deep. I'm ocean deep. I'm complicated. Don't judge me. Don't say I'm that. So a lot of people come to our space because they're being judged, because they became small. Not just because of that one moment, but for a series of moments they were told that you're stupid, you're poor, you don't already have it inside you. What is big, what is vast. So minds are now going into metaphorical thought, and that's what the mind does. So the body starts with the concrete. If you want to change the mind, you also need to go to the body, because historically there is a point of view that for you to reach abstract thought, you had to sense it first. Now we understand all of these association areas, and you're partly accepting that I'm from Africa. We're all Africans. And then we just decided to do that. And then we're now trying to put the playlist earlier, by the way, was called African Time. The thing with the Lucy part, that's called, African Clockworks was the original title. That's the intention. So this is going to answer certain questions about the movements. When I choose sounds in the noise app, I don't just choose a sound. I actually have meanings for every sound. And that's very current where cognitive science is actually at as well. So one view is that the mind borrows from the body. The body starts with the sense experience. You have concrete knowledge that's not abstract. Your body knows a lemon. Your body knows ketchup, maybe. Your body knows cold water. What this is going to say is a lot of your language and a lot of your thinking process had to borrow from what your body initially knew. Not your body, but the body of the species and all organisms that had a heart, lungs, and a brain. That's your ancestry. You had to borrow from all of that. So sense experience in that way is really big. But it, in a sense, from this view, and we will refute that later on, the body starts with what's concrete. So remember when we gave examples of not concrete ideas, like love? Love is not concrete. You can approach almost anyone and say, what is love? Some of them will go into Hallmark, Valentine's Day kind of stuff. Some people will take something out of a New Age book. But it's never going to be the same. So like the mind is so abstract. You can approach any psychologist, any educator, any psychiatrist who's supposed to understand the mind. They will never give you the same answer. Do you actually have a definition of the mind? You're changing people's minds, but what is your definition of the mind? I have my own. I'm not going to say it now. So, okay, senses are interesting. Aristotle told us there are only 5, and they're still teaching that in schools. Is that okay with you? There's now 100 senses being tracked. And here are some of their names. The first 5 are the obvious. Pain is a sense. It's called nociception. Balance is a sense. Equilibrioception. Position is a sense. Your body can sense the chemicals. When you take drugs, when there are chemical changes, your body knows. Movement is now a sense. It's called the kinesthetic. And people can now... Science says humans can't sense electricity. I beg to differ. I say, fuck you.
Is that recorded?
Yes. Oh, that one. I was thinking about that as I was saying it, but fuck you. Here's the others. Magnetism, can you sense that? You know, this morning she was putting Johanna was putting her hands near you, and then they were just, we can sense magnetism. Interoception, sense of time. Chronoception, wow. They don't have a name for the sense of itch. Who was feeling that the other day? The itch is separate from tactition, so that deserves its own place. Vestibular function, whether you're moving or not, you can feel. Speed. Stretch receptors, they don't have a name for that, but that's a sense. Muscles stretching, or muscles of organs even. Mechanoreception, hunger, thirst, and the sense of temperature.
Interesting.
Look at that.
Yeah.
It's standing.
But it was interesting in this documentary about, or the study about oxytocin, that they were studying how it's being released in what sort of touch, that it was not like a massage, or it's not like scratching or anything else, but it's a certain kind of sense of gentle, touch. So it's like so subtle and then we have these, like,
We have
say,
this
like,
whole array.
it's a really precise thing that would affect a certain brain part to release a certain chemical.
Yeah, it gives you such a big range now that the body is integrating. Because you walk into the room, it's just like one room. But all of these are operating. So even when you're in the journey, what's actually interesting is you're feeling it all. But it's not always integrated. Just being able to speak to it, you might notice it more and more. Like, for example, for a lot of people, their bodies start to move, yet their mind is operating in the same way. They're thinking of what am I going to have for lunch? And then they're crying. So there's a schizophrenia. There's a separation between the senses. But all of these are still also doing that. Like, my body's feeling super cold right now. And then there's this emotion. And then I'm seeing things. They're all happening separately, all together, but separately. What was I? We're healing the split that's in Western philosophy. This is philosophical. When Descartes came up with cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, because he was doubting the world. He was going into Cartesian doubt, René Descartes. He didn't trust the world. He said you cannot trust the senses. That's when he separated the mind and the body. So he came up with this Platonic idea of idealism. That created a dualism that still wounds Western philosophy. Eventually that would heal through another French thinker named Jacques Derrida. So the French actually holds a lot of the linearity and the circularity in this. There's deep philosophy in a lot of what we're speaking. So when you bring the senses back and say that has spirit as well, what you're doing is you're not anymore canceling out the body as part of the spiritual experience. A huge, right? Yay! It's great. Okay, so now we go into the mind. The mind is also the body. I spoke about this. There was this whole story in Freud saying we can't know the mind, it's the unconscious. But Jacques Lacan said, no, the language structures the unconscious. And then we realize the brain structures language. But now we come in. The movements are actually structuring the brain and language and meaning. So the body is knowable through the body. The mind is knowable through the body. Can you see the circle now? What in the first place, like separated, we're healing it. Can you see what's happening? The body got pushed away. The body was evil. The body is gross. The body is material. But no, the body is the universe. So the body now needs to come up and speak to the mind. We're now thinking through the body. The circle now completes. Okay, so now we go and do something with this. A little bit of complexity, but we won't understand the movements without this. So, you know what a metaphor is. You've heard of what is a metaphor? It's when yes, it's when you borrow the qualities of one thing to explain another thing. So what we're going to explain here is the mind works with the body's metaphors. The mind metaphorizes what the body knows. Your thoughts and your words are actually metaphors of what the body knows. So when the body does certain things, like when it does that, when it does this, these are things that the baby had to learn. That means simple things like up and down, inside, outside, hot and cold. Before you created abstract thoughts around them, the body had to make decisions very often dual, that, okay, if I put my hand over the candle, that's not going to be nice. So you wouldn't do it again, so your body had to make a decision through nociception or the sense of pain. So now when people's bodies are moving, they're actually changing the meanings, trying to look for a less dual state. Sometimes you see one hand only moving, and then that needs to balance out with another. So that's a metaphor, meaning it has to start from like a source domain, and then one goes into a target domain. There are different types of metaphors. So meaning our mental concepts are borrowed from physical ones. This is to say that Western philosophy is disembodied. They believed in a disembodied mind, that the mind floats out there without a body. So what science, cognitive science, psychology is now trying to do is to say, no, the mind is embodied. And you hear this a lot in spiritual community. Like, do you embody who you are? Do you embody your truth? Do you embody... We're not okay anymore with just the concept being a concept out there floating in space. We're grounding it here, now, in presence, not in absence. That's the philosophical project. And so the body and the mind's doing that through metaphorization. Here are some examples of metaphors. When you say you're happy, it usually has something to do with up. So when you're sad, you're down. You don't say, I'm rising asleep. You normally fall asleep. And then when you wake, it's up. When you say, okay, I feel left out, or the group invited me in, that is spatial. So you could see the borrowing there. For you to experience the emotion, there has to be verticality. A lot of that's being decided by the body and not just by your mind. It's actually rooted in the body. Consciousness has verticality. When you check out language, you will see it all over the world, no matter where. The same brain structures that saw the sun come up and the moon come out in different parts of the day were structured in the same way, because we have the same earth. That's why we have the same brain. It's all the same experience being interpreted in multiple different colors and systems of interpretation. Let me give an example with the last one. You've gone into my facilitation where I speak. What's one of the most common words that I say when people are right there, laying down? Travel. Are you actually traveling? No. I'm creating a metaphor. Travel is a concept. And I'm putting two things together, like a journey is a traveling. It doesn't need to be. In the past, spirituality is about staying in place. Don't move. You're moving. Stop moving. I'm actually working with these metaphors. So when I choose certain music, it's to get you to move inside, to get you to take a walk, to ride a spaceship. This is what I'm using. I'm using the Noise app because it has a whole bunch of tools that allows me to make connections between your mind and your body. I'm not working with basic concepts. I'm actually making connections in many ways. So these are examples of orientational metaphors. Ontological metaphors would be when you borrow something from the concrete and then translate that into the abstract. It's also when you start to personify certain events or ideas to make them look like people. Like people say, okay, transmission is a metaphor. So when people say transmission, that actually has a schematic, right? When some people would use more like resonance. That's a schema that also has meanings. So depending on the schema or the concept that you use, you will work with the movements. You will work with the relationships that are involved in that. So let's say you're working with poverty, and people are like, "Oh, I'm poor." So when you look at the last statement, he felt empty. What's the metaphor in that? It's not so clear. But when you hear the word empty, think of a baby. What's the first play that a baby usually does? What they do is this isn't such a good example, but they would look for a container. And then they would look for a bunch of things. It could be like a stone. It could be like a ball. And then they would put it inside. And then they would take it outside. And then they would put it inside. And then they would take it outside. So what is the concept they're learning there? The concept is container. The concept is container. So now when they know container, they can put things inside the container. That's the metaphor of the mind. So when you start seeing people in the journeys, they're taking the container. This is the baby in them. They're taking the energy. It doesn't mean anything from an abstract. They're taking the energy that they don't like and they're putting it outside as a baby would, because they've gone down into the domain of the real, the public speech stage, the baby stage where they need to create more meanings. So they need to borrow from that dimension where, there are all of these metaphors, like verticality, like up and down, hot or cold. They're actually signifying what the baby's doing. They're not basic concepts anymore. They're dimensional things that will influence, like wealth, for example. That, okay, I'm too filled with, or I don't have enough. So then some people would be like, sometimes you don't see it, but it's actually like, because they're needing to create a new thought. So their body needs to go into a motoric and somatosensory way to signify that I am full now. I am not so empty anymore. That's going to give you so much to observe, that this is the mind thinking from a body level, like everything that all the movements ever meant. Because now we have complex movements. But on a deep level, a lot of those movements are actually being influenced by they're called spatial primitives, the most basic meaning-making elements but a lot of it started there. One of the most important schematics is called the schema, was the container schema. That the body is a container. So if you're empty, you need to fill it. But if you have stuff inside, you need to put it out. So this doesn't need to correlate with movement, because a lot of the movement is internal, the shaping. But when you do speak certain words, when you I've been holding these sessions for the last days, and now you might figure out that, okay, that's why he says certain things sometimes. It's to trigger some of these metaphors to allow you to go into these situations where if there's a need to go into abundance, everything you need is already inside. Those words are very carefully chosen, along with the music.
If everybody's going to that, you need to say something.
That's how it was a long time ago. Now, even those outer movements don't even need to be expressive at the inner movements as well.
You're enough.
You're enough.
The container's full, you just need to fill it.
Yeah.
Because when we use words like, oh, I don't have energy,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it would come from outside, so I need to go in that I get energy. But if I would say like, oh, right now I need to switch my perception that I can We had a lot of talks yesterday about what words we use, and then we had this evening talk in the kitchen, and the word transmission is like it's like sexual disease is transmitted, so it goes from one to another. But then we were looking at energy doesn't work that way; that it goes one directionality. So we need to be very particular how we use the words, because if I teach or guide something that now you are activated, then you create a concept of life where either you're not able to do it by yourself, or that it's something separate that you already have. So then those neurons then starts to wire, and it works because people start believing in it, of course. So it's like very careful the meanings, and even saying one word to explain what I mean by this, because we all might think it's different.
Yeah.
For us.
And that's actually the same as Western medicine, isn't it? The transmission thing. It's like you need someone else to do something to you, and or to give that pill. Yeah.
As a schema, yeah. So any concept that you hold is a schematic. That's the point that we are trying to come across, that a schematic is a bunch of images held by a big image, right? What is the image that you would like to hold with the sound? Because the sound is polar to the image. If you're going to hold a vibration, hold an image, and that image will contain the journey. So the words that you speak would be part and parcel of. And what I want to say to you is that in the cognitive sciences, there actually are very exact schemas that are found in every languages, that are either in terms of space. There's something about the middle and the
This is like kind of parallel related, but it's just something that I feel like I need to ask.
Yes.
So like when you're creating a journey, like a
Yes.
sound journey, do you feel like you always have an intention, or do you just like create the wave without intention?
It depends on the medium I'm using. So the playlists that I use today, those were created in a DAW or a program where I could, in the comfort of my own house, create a sequence, not live. And when I am able to do that, I'm usually able to see the story, because I'm doing it in space, not in time. But when I'm doing it on the spot, the story is normally just going to come out. But if I have certain programs that I could use live, like the Noise app, where I can respond to what's happening, I still see the story, but not in space, but in time. Do you see the difference between space and time? Live means doing it then and there. Space usually for us means studio. So when you have certain programs where you can line up the songs
It's more like
at home.
studios having a preconceived idea that you kind of put into the room, and then
Yeah.
live is responding
To what's there.
space.
Yeah.
And there's still a linear story probably evolving either way.
Yeah.
But you just aren't forcing it.
Yeah.
Or I wouldn't use the word force, but coercing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I, yeah.
Something comes up, and then that becomes
Right.
The best is if you could do both. Because I now have these studio-based recordings, but I can change that on the spot anyway, right? So I can still respond. But it's actually beautiful when you're not in a hurry. Because when I've been facilitating, I've always been caught with those situations where there's a story here. And I can't run over there and like change the vibration as I touch this person. So doing those small bits that will become part of the whole later pays off in many ways. When you do have an understanding of how schematics could work. Because there are so many instances where, like, what are the things people bring that's in the space that's, like issues or problems. A lot of them would be abundance or disconnection or feeling stuck. So I need to have these tools where, okay, for stuckness, I need movement. For disconnection, I need a way to link things together. So I need certain sounds or frequencies that would, so in the beginning, I could read through speaking to people or seeing where they're at or knowing the cultures, what would be certain issues that I could then address according to the mappings.
Marco asked this one in how, just a personal, how do you introduce the space to new people?
Mm.
And then this came out that sometimes in the check-in, like just ask them what brought you here. And then, for example, if half of the people are like, I'm so afraid, but I just wanted to come. So then the themes might come from there already, that then you speak to that room at that moment in the introduction, what needs to be spoken. And for example, the fear theme might come up, so you might then reflect it through sound. You just see how everyone is like, or that everyone is super cool and relaxed, and they're looking, oh, must make something. So the themes can come like through speaking or observing or just feeling intuitively where people are.
This would be interesting on top of that. Like a structural metaphor allows for the actual borrowing of the structure inside the one domain into the other. So when you hear people say time is money, it's because our concept of time actually correlates with the structure for money. When people say you're wasting time, you're using values that normally has to do with the money system into time. I don't have enough time. And a lot of people are saying that because they don't have enough resources. So there's structures inside one domain that's very correlated. So it's almost like we structured money based on the structure of time itself. So when people say, okay, I need to go to the office, I'm gonna have to struggle again. I'm gonna have to go to battle again. Like work is a war. It's like going to war. So a lot of the things in language, the way people say things, why is this important? It's because we want to understand how belief is structured. You can always just change an energy, but when the belief isn't changing, it's not going to happen. They will feel better, sure. But the architecture, the interior design not changing, it's still going to influence how they're going to feel the next thing in the morning. So you see where I'm coming from. Without understanding of the image schema people are holding, you won't be able to speak to it on more abstract levels. It's just the body changing, but the mind's not actually changing. To change the mind, you need to change the body. But how is the body holding the mind in place? This is going to take a journey, a lifetime. It's amazing, though, to heal the split, that we're not just doing things out of empty, making things up process. This is current. This is cognitive science. It's called embodied cognition. And it's where pure structuralism is now taken together everything we learned in philosophy, including the Indian, the Chinese, and the non-Western, neurology, psychology, anthropology, which is the study of culture, into just one thing. Super coherent, super cohesive. So one more thing, and I think it's in another slide. Let's go back to World Child.
Can I have a question about belief?
Yes, yeah,
Would you say that the belief is made up of like the schemas?
yes. They're made up of building blocks, and those building blocks are schemas, image schemas.
And and how would you go about changing? Would you go about changing the belief by targeting the schemas? Like you break it down,
Yes.
and then you translate it into sound. Is that what you do?
So the image schemas are, as we're learning it now, foundational. They were learned when a person was young. A person who might have received all these messages when they were young, that you're small, we don't have enough to eat, I don't have enough space, I'm not good enough. Those had chemical and body-based reactions. So people would then emit stress hormones, fear neurotransmitters. So a lot of the processes that are liberating are actually changing, like a lot of that. So those initial schemas message the baby or the small child that things are small. If you want the world to become big, you need to communicate to those foundational. Like a lot of what people are thinking are founded on those initial schemas. Like how are they seeing containers? Are you abundant? Are you sufficient? Or are you always lacking? Lacking in knowledge, lacking in understanding, lacking in love, lacking in power, lacking in creativity, and lacking in resources, lacking in intelligence. You can see they're all, you block one, you block everything else. You open one, you open everything else, just on that one basic schema alone. The most basic schema, which is containment. So we're realizing inner child actually has all these interesting body-based dimensions that's already being at work all across it explains, you can see why it's a TOE, it explains everything.
So that's why you go back to the baby.
Yes, because that's where it started. That's where it started. Yes, that's where it started. That's foundational. You could change. That's why thoughts just don't change. Like I'm going to become a better person. No, how did you shape it in the beginning? No. You can see that's the technology we hold. It makes it so. Our work is foundational. With that explanation, everyone should think this is interesting. You get it?
I've studied movement from the point of view of like where does it come from, and there has been also this concept of body schema and body image. So you have a mind image of a body,
yeah.
then the schema of the body is like how it extends in the space where you are. If you're driving a car, your body becomes part of the car becomes body of, part of your body, and like that already opens up so many parts. And as like imagining a baby who does not have an image of a body, does not also have like a container of a body schema, but starts learning by touch and moving around like, okay, I'm something in this kind of container, but then again I'm in contact with something else.
This helps me to think about another way of looking at this that explains a lot. All of your ideas, your beliefs, and your thoughts actually have behavior. They all have movements. You personify them. They all have personalities. They're all like acting in a certain way. A lot of them are grounded in the image schema, but that's called an affordance, which is like, what can one thing do? So if you want to give it more freedom, more space, you actually need to give the thoughts a little bit more capacity. And a lot of the people who are limited, their thoughts have very limited behavior. It's very tight. It doesn't know how to go out there and be free. It's really interesting to become embodied in that way again.
So in a way, the words, like when you introduce something that's unexpected, it has the same effect as the music.
Yeah.
When there's something unexpected.
Yeah.
You latch on to something that they know.
Yeah.
And then you open it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember
It's super cool.
sometimes using like not deciding what's coming out, but there might be something coming up, like what, like how are you moving through the membrane of know the external and the internal, and then you're just speaking about something like that is kind of comprehensible, but it doesn't mean anything in a way. So one lady was like, it sounds like it makes a lot of sense and it feels like, but
it's super basic, pre-verbal.
It just doesn't make any sense in a way. So that gives an opportunity to go through these concepts instead of something very precise, like
when you say like, oh, you look so open, you open people up.
Yeah.
These are the body
Yeah.
reacting.
Yeah.
And you said, oh, you look different.
They're not just words
From that
anymore.
one experience.
Yeah.
The face, everything looks
Yeah,
different
yeah, yeah.
in the body.
In the body.
The body has relaxed, open, let something go.
Yeah.
And some, like bridging some questions that has come up and this, and I'm not sure it's not exactly the schema, but then we've been talking, or some people's been asking that, oh, if someone is looping in their experience and they don't go anywhere, how can I break through and whatnot? I think my first 3-4 years, maybe 3 years in my own process, was that I was always going to this process of not being good enough. And I'm kind of like a victimhood, like a lot of crying, a lot of emotion, a lot of hard openings and processes which were intense, and always I was like feeling like there's these authorities and I'm not good enough, and it came up all the time. So I kind of couldn't, it was kind of looping the experience until there was the one session I was in Lithuania, and then I went again to this crying, a victim, I'm not good enough, my life is this, a lot of stories that made me cry. Also that there was like a story that made the emotions to come out, and then sometimes there was suddenly tears, but there was no reason, and I was like, whoa, now I'm not crying to a story. So I also realized how I create the crying. But then in this one session, I went to the same process again, and then that time we used song by songs and maybe some sad song and beautiful. I was again like, oh, and again, Allah, this is my life. And then suddenly I just woke up in my own loop of that process that, oh, I'm creating this. I've created this. Oh, okay. And then, so the whole, and it was really crazy moment because the whole perception changed when I realized that I'm in this again, I have to experience this again and again and again until I get so bored to realize that I'm actually doing this and I've actually created this. And I cannot blame my parents or this life happening, my ex-partners and this and that, always to go into the same pattern that I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
So I kind of saw my own structure, but I have to realize it myself to actually shift something in that structural system in myself. And then I saw it, and then it shifted. It didn't come, and everything external in my life changed also when it came to space holding or teaching. Or I always was like, my voice was down because I never was good enough in front of a group. So there was a lot of things, and suddenly through one session actually, but it was a longer journey, the inner picture and the structure of myself changed, but no one else from outside could not kind of do it without me going through it on. And also the looping, when some people talk before, it can be actually good, so no one else can break through my own belief system of my structural self.
Is that the second stage a little bit? Is that part of it?
So we're working through dimensions. There's this thing about trauma work, which can be loopy, which needs to be essential in some stages if people are hiding, are not looking at some things, and haven't had the chance to look at it, and then to make negotiations, to break out of the loop. Sometimes you need to be in it to see it. Then it's honest. Because sometimes when you're resisting, it persists. When you look at it, it's already changing. Now, partly with a lot of what's being spoken, you realize that you need to almost be a preschool teacher to talk to the child. But you also need to be the baby. But to make it a relearning experience, the baby needs to be a cosmos or a universe. And the preschool teacher also needs to be the universe, teaching the universe in a way. So it depends on the situation if a person is going to detach from the heavy story that's like looping. Where we are going to break free from the embodiment, the current embodiment would be, okay, now you hear spiritual communities using all these new words like I resonate. That's a metaphor because resonance belongs to sound, to waves. I resonate with you. And people say, I'm downloading. That's not a human behavior. Downloads have to do with CPUs and internets and whatnot. People saying frequencies, the vibe. So what's happening now is we're borrowing from another dimension, the cosmic, the quantum metaphors. We're now metaphorizing from the fourth dimension, the fifth dimension. It's kind of cool when you look at it. Resonance, transmission, all of those are coming from the other side. Some of them are still being interpreted in human terms, but a lot of it's actually coming from another side already. Some people call that the tesseract or the hypercube. We were talking about flat Earth. So imagine the 2D people suddenly see a 3-dimension. You remember flat Earth? That's the story. But what would happen if you suddenly saw a fourth dimension? And a lot of us are actually starting to go there already. You wouldn't know what to make of it. That's called the tesseract or the hypercube. So there is something beyond baby here, because the baby did just come from, the other dimension. So a lot of the metaphors are now not 3D anymore. But in transition, you need to be aware a little bit of how a lot of those were implanted anyhow. And that's a little bit what the body's doing. I want to go into a last amazing mapping. What we just did was we looked at the philosophy, which is really important. Now we're going back into the brain. This is going to be super useful for you. Super useful for all facilitators. Now, you had a question for me. Why does my head start to go kind of retarded on me? My neck. It goes like that. So let's talk about her dad or your own brains. The entorhinal cortex, hippocampus, is responsible for memory. Okay, it's in the temporal lobe, and there are these interesting cells that are being discovered only as of recent. Like we talked about the play cells, so even when your eyes are closed, you know where you're at. I think what's interesting about embodiment as a thought experiment, if you want to really disembody the body, go with this really old thought experiment. What would you look like if you were born inside a dark room and they just stuck you there and then there was no sound? Would you develop as you would without the senses? There were these really horrible experiments by the Pharaoh of Egypt and some of the kings where they would actually stick babies into these vacuums, these vacuums where they can't sense anything. They'd bring them out at the age of 6 or 7 and they would listen to the first sound they make, and then they would say that's the universal language. And then they would compare it to Hebrew, to Aramaic, to Egyptians, and then they came up with all these concepts. Eventually some of these kids died because of lack of they didn't develop in any way. So this is something to think about when we want to regard, are we disembodied or are we embodied? We probably designed this so we could experience the universe through a resonator. The body experiences, the mind perceives. Somewhere in between we create. So there's something about memory that's important. Like for me, when I think of memory, I put mori. Mori means death in Latin. So the more I remember, the more I forget. The more I forget, the more I remember. When you die, you will remember. But when you're born, you will forget. So that you can just be a limited remembrance to become a member. Now, when you look at the hippocampus and the entorhinal cortex, there are these interesting cells. So when you're facilitating, I did it to you this morning. I'm talking about that. There are these cells that are responsible for head direction. So when you slowly move ahead to be able to look at things from another side, there are aspects of the cortex and the entorhinal and the hippocampus that's responsible for perceiving things, high or low, left or right. Now, border cells have metaphoric qualities. You have cells responsible for the boundary. It helps you to understand the limits. You have cells that orient you according to speed, how fast or how slow. So you don't need to be in a car or a supersonic jet plane. If you can make someone go faster and slower, it means that you're activating the speed cells. You also have time cells, and now you do have a little bit of an understanding of place cells, like where am I located? It orients you. And then the grid cells is the greater integration of all of these. So this is really kind of important to understand, that the whole cortex is actually universal. Whether it be an auditory cortex or a motor cortex or a somatosensory cortex or a visual cortex, they're all actually all the same cells, and they all have these capacities. So this one I would especially love for you to experiment with, the head erection cells. A lot of facilitators don't realize that very gently, just let them, it totally changes the universe. This comes with the realization that the eyes are, the auditory cortex is connected to the head direction cells. And the visual cells are connected to the eye cells. So when you see the eyes beginning to look a certain way, that means it's the visual cortex that's in fact controlling the eyes. So holding certain parts near here will influence this. You are able to create signals there. Changing the direction of the head signals the auditory cortex in general. Even sometimes people take this and they lift up the head, or it naturally goes up. A lot of that has to do with vestibular, equilibrium. All these functions are all integrated somehow. This is what allows you to remember. If you damage the hippocampus, you will not have an orientation of where you are at in time and space. So we are going back to subcortical regions. Wait. This is the hippocampus. Just think of a hippo. Just remember of a hippo. So what we're realizing is memory starts there, but then it spreads across the whole cortex. That's new. We used to think that it was just the hippocampus that remembers, but now we have spread memory throughout the whole thing. So how is that useful? All of these are useful just to think of a whole network. So when you think about, okay, this is an energy field, you can get assistance from all these different neuronal bodies that are in charge of telling people, okay, there's like the border. So how do you signal, okay, you're too limited. You have a boundary. We have to help you go beyond the boundary. So what I normally do when I facilitate is, instead of just going to the obvious body parts, I like going to the toe, because that sends their mind towards there. And then I try to do something that makes them expand beyond the boundary. So then their mind was limited. Usually when your eyes are open and when you're vertical, your mind's here. The projections are there. You think you're here. But when you close your eyes, your mind becomes bigger. And then the mind starts to become bigger, and then you become the whole room. And then you become the whole garden. And then you become Finland. And then you become the cosmos. So how do you stretch the mind? You need to work with the border cells. You need to communicate to that sense of boundary that okay, now it's time to stretch. Don't just do yoga. Do yoga in terms of time, in terms of space. So learning to signal, learning to find the stimuli through touch, through sound, through words, they all now come into concert. All of your tools come into concert. Holding the schemas as a one narrative or one big picture. Anyone can do this with that understanding. Whatever the manifestations, understanding a little bit more about the body and mind now, whatever you call yourself, like an inner dance facilitator, a Kundalini space holder, a preschool teacher, this applies to everything already. Because we can understand the concert. You're like you're just creating a symphony. It doesn't need to follow any format now, because you have so many tools whenever the mind and body wants to change itself.
The border cells, do they relate to vision and hearing as well, not just touch?
No. Their only function is to help you. They're probably connected, because in the entorhinal and the hippocampal have extensions to the hippocampus, to the posterior association cortex, so it's connected, but its only function is to help you understand, this is my boundary. It establishes containers.
I was thinking that people choose to meditate in an environment that's expansive.
Yes, yeah.
Maybe.
Some people grow up in a place like Hong Kong, where everything's so tight. Singapore. Let's say right now we're working with people in prisons, and in the Philippines, that's super cramped. So we're giving them these inner dance processes where they can fly.
How's that going?
It's amazing. They're not even necessarily laying down. They could be setting up, they're painting, and then there's sound in the background, and there's words being played. Someone's reading a book. So they're activating the auditory cortex. But because they're painting, they're accessing the visual cortex, and they're expressing. They're not just receiving. And then the words help with the Wernicke's area. So there's these multimodal associations at work. The kind of expressions they're writing, it's like, wow. It can be super dark, where they're painting demons, but alongside that there are unicorns and
Maybe show it tomorrow. Project stuff.
You're not going around doing like...
No, none of that. That's us taking the gifts of the frameworks and then applying that totally, where it's still the process, right? Any one of you can make these proposals to corporations, to prisons, to schools, to hospitals. This can be applied.
Quick question.
Yes.
What are things you can do to work with the border and the time cells? The border you explained.
Yeah.
And people go from here to there, but actually want them to
Yes.
expand more. But how can we give them the direction to
Right.
go beyond the body?
Okay, this could be interesting for us to discuss. That's just one, right? This could be interesting to discuss. Some people actually then need the border when they're not contained. Some people aren't contained, so it could be as simple as, here's a blanket, or get them into the womb and then hold them. But some people are too tight, so they need to be open.
Like swaddling babies.
Yeah.
They get so,
Yeah, which happens in stages. Sometimes they're too tight and they need to open, and sometimes they need to be held. For me, sound could be particular. I could start with rhythm. So when you create like a rhythm, that rhythm, when it stabilizes, holds a border. It can hold the boundary cells already with a border. So when you want to break that border, you need to speed it up gently. You need to know what would be the intensity so that that border would break. Because thought also has a rhythm, as one example. And any rhythm that you conduct, there's a possibility where you entrain them into that rhythm.
That's what you did
Yes.
today when you put up the frequency.
Yeah.
If it is fast enough,
Yes.
there will be a tone and a border will
Yeah,
be
yeah. It pushes them over the edge sometimes because they have to deal with more information. And sometimes that's going to be emotional or energetic. It doesn't need to be like a thinking space. That's my most common technique, probably.
And for time?
That was the same. Like that's combining time cells and border cells using time-oriented techniques, which has to do with speed or velocity. Then I can expand the border or make it smaller. So a lot of what you are already doing actually does this. A lot of the ways you're touching and holding and speaking and vibrating, you're already doing this. My role here, often for those who are already doing it, just to put words and a little bit more mapping so that you can like slowly maybe even find other ways to improve.
Yeah, but I was asking this because
Yes.
if you're working with groups,
Yeah.
you see flow going,
Mm.
people
Mm.
are getting into the experience,
Yeah.
really activating, but some people are,
Yeah.
they say also
Mm.
in the feedback, they aren't able to surrender.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
are stuck
Mm.
in
Okay.
the head.
So I would put some irony here, actually. Like to establish coherence, cohesion, congruence, border cells would actually be important to put into place in the beginning to contain the energy.
The safe space.
It needs to be held. And sometimes it's not easy because of who's coming in, and sometimes you can feel it's so held. That would be more with the trainings because people really climbed up and deserve to be in that clear space. But in the basic workshops, when you have people who are either skeptical, not there yet, or it's like a mix, it's harder to create a container. But that's the irony. Before you break the container, you actually need to create it first. Yes, exactly. There's this concept used for preschool teachers and parents is called the zone of proximal development. So when a baby is growing up, there has to be a clear zone. Before they go beyond the boundaries of that zone, there has to be a lot of care so that growth can happen that's particular to that zone. Any baby who is forced to move away from the zone of development before they're ready, it's harsh. So you need to create a really strong zone, contextual zone, energetic zone, empathic zone.
We have also some talks about this yesterday, but especially if we work in a countries where people are a lot in their heads, and for me here, and because I'm myself like that, so for me, it was like an expectation and pressure not to be in the head, because no one said it's okay to be in your head, actually. So I had to like feel again, I'm not good enough because I'm not in this cosmic orgasms and awakenings and this and that in my processes, because that was highlighted that this work, like in Bali, it was like that. Everyone had to just Kundalini or energy or awakening and this and that. So then I still always journeyed a lot with my thoughts until I figured out in my own process, like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm so much in my head. I'm structured in this way, and most Finnish people are, that we think a lot. And actually through this I'm able to learn about my mind, how it works, about what I'm thinking. I'm still in the session of observers. I'm still awake, but in the dream. But if my mind is really active, I'm able to actually get to know my mind, which is a huge part of our life if we are living society that is thinking a lot.
Mm.
So then I'm like, why that, like how important it would be for beginners or people who come in not to give expectations. It should be something else, because then they are disappointed because they're expecting something else and not working what is actually in that moment in their process. So what I started to use as a tool is like, okay, if someone is saying like, oh, I was just in my head, I was like, okay, that's your process. Let's look at it. What was happening in your head? So they can use any material in that moment, what's happening in their experience as their inner dance process.
Yeah, yeah.
But it doesn't need to be something else. And then there comes the point, how do we introduce the work? If we introduce it that this is this experience, or we're expecting or seeking for this experience because I think it's this, because my inner dance has always been like this, so then people come and they don't feel they're succeeding in something if they don't get that experience that I'm saying that this is a trance. Oh, I don't go to trance, so okay, this is not for me because I failed to in your goals, how you gave expectations. So it's really, really like, how could we actually hold equal free space, which means the experience can be whatever, and none is like you failed. But then they feel disappointed, they give you money and they didn't get what they wanted because it was introduced. And how do we text and write it or talk about it? So
Most people say, I can't meditate, I try, I can't empty my mind. And you're like, that's not what you're supposed to do.
Yeah,
A lot
same,
of people
same,
say,
same.
I need to shut off my mind, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
Can you show me the button? And
Yeah, yeah.
figure it out, and I tell them, but your mind is very welcome in this too.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
here and you're down, just take them along in your journey.
This
Then
is
it's
good.
allowed. And then when it's pushed away, it's
Yeah.
resistant.
This is super key. What we're trying to work on now is such an inclusive process. We're trying to look for a framing. Like image schemas are framings. They're frames. How do you frame things so that a facilitator does not get trapped by the expectation? It causes a lot of suffering, and it's not an individual. It's not something we can individually control, because the world is now filled with these expectations because of the current framing. Like her teacher used to be a Kundalini yoga teacher. So a lot of the framing then had passed on. Like that's what's happening now. Frames are being passed on using certain terminologies that are scattered. Like Shaktipat is a framing, and we're having to answer all these emails. What are the kind of emails we're getting? Like, could you awaken my something something? Could you Shaktipat me? Could you put your finger on my thing? And then
I get transmission from Master Pi, or can you activate me? And I'm like, I cannot, but you can.
it's really getting hard actually, because the framing is.
Answer, but I think we've practiced it 3-4 years now to open up. Then we have to start from the beginning. Okay, what is this all about? If we are studying consciousness, what does that mean? We are not transmitting or activating. Yeah, like you don't come and get a product to your money. But it's really like that in many countries, not all, but so many countries are like going to this like fast food experience.
It's almost killing us when some people come to Maya and then they're craving it so much and then they're not getting it. And it's just so heavy because they don't have other tools beyond.
But they're so used to going somewhere, getting something, but very often people also describe, when I do the transmission, or you have to be careful who is doing the transmission.
Yeah,
You
it
get
doesn't
there and
help.
No, it's
Yeah.
an energetic experience you have on a personal level.
Yeah.
That field.
Yeah.
And we're here to hold the space,
Yeah.
to catalyze, to help you surrender.
Yeah. So you're asking people to take personal responsibility rather than to give their power away.
Otherwise, they're waiting for you to come and touch them.
Yeah.
Because then it will happen. So they have to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
aware that they're receiving not from
Yeah. So meaning what's happening right now is people want it fast, easy, and big, and then they will pay.
The lunch break.
They will pay you.
That's the expectation. because
That's
when we do some questioning, people say,
Yeah.
second session, not in my first.
Mm.
And they do so much
Yeah.
beautiful work, but it was just in the second session and not in their first. So they really wanted the first time right, all fixed.
Am I now done?
Yeah. How many does it take?
Am I done?
Yeah.
With every discipline.
I'm never done.
The
People want
schemas
everything
about
fast.
lack and the containment of
Yeah.
abundance or not enough. I should have got it first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's coming from there.
Hurry up, grow up quickly.
Shaktipat is an ancient, like, Indian traditional word that it just got so cheapened in a matter of years. People who have never heard the word just now ascribe something to it. They think it's the answer.
What did it mean?
It's an initiation process that normally takes like a lot of years, sometimes decades, before the process is imbibed in someone. And now the image is, I go to someone who has the mojo, the oompa loompa, and then I get touched and like there, boom.
Yeah, but they don't realize it has to do so much with them and where they are. And it's not coming from that person, although it's almost like it, but it's an energetic experience.
It's called a spiritual bypass, basically. It's called shortcut.
I like how you phrase that. You said the process is embodied in someone.
Yeah.
Which is so different.
Is it? Yeah.
And that's what the yogis were doing. They were embodying the what is consciousness outside of this world. That's what they were doing as well, but in different ways. They didn't use the methods that are, but they were still using or working along the same like nervous autonomic nervous system
Because
extensions and
this
main ways.
because this came alongside Facebook, and what media was going to do to minds, that's called instant gratification. Like,
I also heard about facilitation, that some facilitators train by someone called raw energy, and if you are trained in different modality, then the facilitation is like more diluted.
yeah, that's the word, watered down. Well, based on the contract, you can't actually join the trainings anymore if you trained under Pai or Nadia or.
Own experience also through my own studies and teacher, but then also through all the other studies with yoga, with different therapy forms, different lineages and things. So then for me, the whole thing is about kind of non-linear, linear, and patriarchal, and what's kind of freedom, what's actually that each and everyone would be trusted that we are equal and we are actually able to decide. We don't need a mother or a father or a teacher or a priest or a master or a guru. So Shaktipat means that you get the power, or you get a new rule, or you get a new teaching from one master. So it is a power tool of lineages, and it's probably been somehow in ancient times also like politics, like a spiritual power tools and religion. So it's been needed in that time, in that consciousness to control masses. Like in yoga, like you don't just get it too easy, and that's why yogic lineages are now like this.
Yeah.
It's also the same. It's like a fast sport, gymnastics, and for the ones who are like into the more energetic spiritual side, but are not come from lineages, are like there's the same battle. What's happening now, kind of in the energy world or processes. So I feel there's something through inner dance for myself that the process was so free, so it broke all my belief systems about power structures and authorities and what I need and not being good enough. And I really needed to go through it to understand that I'm holding them. It's not society holding me in a structure, my mom or my teacher or this and that, but I blamed like, okay, now my teacher is doing that, so or this modality is doing that, so I have to like break the authority and linear and power structure inside myself, so I could actually like change my schema of it, because then realize if this frees us up kind of from there, then it's more universal thing that might be happening in the world. It's not just that person or this modality doing something. It's like I see the same thing in everything actually. How power is held and how much we are actually giving power back, or how much we trust that the other person is equal and as empowered to find it from inside. But if we don't trust it inside ourselves, we're not going to be able to hold that space for another person, because my belief structure is not totally actually trusting it inside. So there's a lot of checking, like, am I also myself holding my power towards someone else? Because most of us are, and I'm still doing it. I just always need to catch myself, like, are you speaking from your ego now? Okay, that was a little bit like I tried to put myself into some special situation, and to be honest in that, because we all do it. None of us is like there yet. I don't think so. So that it's something in humans. It's something in all of us.
Yeah, it's
kind of
the schema is in the species, because that our ancestral experience had always been about something getting passed on. So when I was asked by Spirit, by the grandmother, to live on the island, the instructions was to break the line, to break the lineage. So the inner dance has this original connotation that everyone can find a teacher from inside. Because when you think about me, I never went to yoga, and I don't have a discipline. I'm actually someone who came from out of nowhere, from a really unlikely place in the world. You would not expect that it would be from there. So that when it hit certain teachers who had strict lineages, like you have this man who worked with David Deda, or Adida, who worked with Ratu Bagus, that's Venant. And then you have Amara, who worked with Sai Baba, and Amma. They had very strict lineages. Yogi Bhajan. So I think the schemas that I was bringing, I was initiated. But when I spoke about it, it was the grandmother, which for me is the planet. So when I was touching people, it's just the resonance of the Mother Earth that actually, that there was a masculinization in the Kundalini activation process, because when the founders stated that this energy comes from Adida, there needed to be, because in his mind there needs to still be a lineage, and if he's going to accredit someone, he used to accredit me and Ratu Bagus until he needed a story, so that the story of transmission would still have a kind of top-down process. Like what inner dance brings is actually bottom-up processing, coming from the basal ganglia and forming the cerebral cortex. So it's not me, it's not him, it's actually something in the human that's very related to family structures and tribal mentality, where something gets passed on.
And just to share as well my experience, that it can be anything. It can be childbirth, it can be a trauma or like a traumatic experience, or it can be just a casual day in the office, that happens. And my yoga practice just hasn't been following one lineage, but it has been very Western, like really open to many things, many types of yoga, many types of meditation, many types of concepts to be taken in. And then in yoga practice, still in a writing practice after, it came to me that everything already is in you. And then I'm like, because I had been thinking that I'm not going to be able to teach anyone because I haven't gone to these lineages of studies. And then it was just coming back and back and back. and like the question that had always been there, like, what is behind here? And it's like, it's all in you already. You're not like the everything that you need to know is in you.
Yeah.
And then when being in a session where there is someone who is explaining the truth that how this works and what we are doing, and giving an intro of something happening to a body, I just recognize that I'm just watching, but I recognize the energy inside of myself. And there is no question that it's because of this other person, but because I can connect with that experience and then this experience and then just everything connects within myself, in my own experiences. And then I'm like, okay, I know this. I know, now I know that there is a language in between, like that somehow.
This is good to kind of close a really big point. Still from a partly neural mapping, the left brain works in sequence and linearity. The right brain is nonlinear. A lineage is to put line age. So the network is sound, words, images. And when you're in the left brain, how you sequence things is called direct priming, where A goes to B, goes to C, goes to D. When you open up to the right brain, that's called hyperpriming, where all the points start to scatter across and they're all connected. So there would still be lineages there, but it would crisscross now, where everything now becomes a teacher. So I think there's a need, because we have a left brain, for there to still be because that's causation. You look at anything that's valuable, you still need to know where is it coming from. What is making it happen? There's something in the mind that when you want to understand it, there has to be a source. But the right brain opening up, we're not there anymore also. But we're just confused because there's still the transition. A lot of people are still needing some kind of source that's not going to be them, or not going to be anything that's...
Could you say that again?
Okay, like going into dopamine, going into the basal ganglia, there's a gating mechanism, so that something called latent inhibition will happen. People who have low latent inhibition become schizo, bipolar, and autistic, and Einstein, because they can make all these connections. Inner dance lowers latent inhibition so that the gating mechanism becomes multisensory. But it's the left brain that gates. So when we're looking for the master, the lineage, or anything outside, it's actually because we're still in causality. Causality means you do this, that's going to happen. Someone touches me, that's going to happen. But the new trusting brain goes into retrocausality, where that happened, but then the cause actually follows. It's weird. In psychedelics, initially people would notice that when the body starts to move, it's like I'm controlling the room. I knew that sound is going to come out. I don't know why. Sort of what people said this morning, that you're saying that, but I was already experiencing it. That's retrocausality. That's hyperpriming, not direct priming, not one at a time. Now A goes to B, but Z jumps back to A, creating this circular time loop called the Ouroboros, which to Egyptians is the serpent eating its own tail, where the end of the beginning meets the beginning of the end of the eternal cycle of life.
That's in quantum physics too. It's like when you look at something, it organizes itself in a way that makes sense.
It collapses.
Like it's everything.
So we're learning to be both now, to still be a person who has problems and sometimes has kids, and then we need access to a lot more. And if it's not going to be like some multi-billion-dollar sponsorship fund, it's going to be at least like information that's already there. Like Lucy, the Lucy brain. I think we're just negotiating on what is safe enough.
It's too confusing and people are scared of it. Like, do I lose that side if I go that far to the other side? Can I still do my work? Can I still be a person?
So that's where we're all at right now. We're going to contribute to this. The brain was already doing it all this time. Like that's what it was doing. The nervous system, the body, embodied consciousness came here with the ability to do that, but it's being held back because of fear, because of restrictions, limitations, thought forms, and belief structures. Everything that you know, you create, and that's what you experience. People are looking for the experience, and that's shifting what they know. It's all a loop. You change what you know, the experience would change. And then the experience becomes bigger, then their belief will change. They piggyback onto each other. We're changing now the experience and the knowing. The integration was on its way a long time ago. We just couldn't do it any other way because we wouldn't enjoy the journey. We couldn't get the complete map because then there was no story. This all had to happen. When you were a baby, you had the whole, but you didn't have the parts. Now we have too many parts. We need to go back to the baby so everything would be whole.
So we have been there all the time.
Yeah. You can't read a book in a second, otherwise there's no enjoyment.
It's insane that
it's a joke.
We have to
it's a big joke.
erupt and forget